You see a lot of people walking around with these on today, and of course that's a good idea, but you know, this is also a good part of a outfit for a cowboy, especially a bandit cowboy or an outlaw robber of the old Wild West. So you kind of think, what if this whole thing is just one big train robbery? Probably one of the most famous train robberies was on June 8th in 1899. That's when the Hole in the Wall gang, led by Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, tried to rob an express train in Wyoming. It was the second time they had taken a run at this same train. The first time, it was protected by Woodcock, and the second time, he was there again.
You don't open that door.
I can't do that. Woodcock? I work for Mr. E.H. Harriman of the Union Pacific Railroad, and he entrusted me. Call a fortune in there, Butch.
That patriot Woodcock was trying to protect the investment of E.H. Harriman of the Union Pacific Railway, his boss. Well, he obviously didn't do it all that well, as they got the money at the end and kind of a botched explosion, as you saw. But you know, the problem was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were just trying to rob the train. Meanwhile, E.H. Harriman was about to try and steal an entire railroad. Edward Henry was the son of a preacher man, and he really didn't like going to school all that much, so at age 14 he quit and got a job sweeping floors in the New York Stock Exchange. That led to him at age 22 having a seat on the New York Stock Exchange, because it turned out he was pretty good at stocks and bonds. He made his money, though, the old-fashioned way. He married it. His wife's father owned a railroad, a very prosperous one. And of course, that got E.H. Harriman interested in thinking maybe he would like to own a railroad too. So with his father-in-law's help, at age 33, he bought the Lake Ontario and Southern Railway. The Lake Ontario and Southern Railway was bankrupt. In fact, it wasn't really much of a railroad at all. But E.H. Harriman turned it around, made it profitable, and sold it to the Pennsylvania Railway for a huge profit. And all of a sudden, he had a business plan. He did the same thing with the Illinois Central, Southern Pacific, and in the late 1890s, the Union Pacific went bankrupt, and E.H. Harriman had an idea. The idea was take a bankrupt railroad, turn it around, make it profitable. And he was very good at it. And while E.H. Harriman was rebuilding bankrupt railroads, James J. Hill of St. Paul, Minnesota, was building railroads. These two dynamic titans of industry, railroad barons each, would clash on this date, April 16th in 1901. It was 118 years ago today that it was baron versus baron, tycoon against tycoon, in one of the biggest squabbles and street fights on Wall Street had ever seen. Here's how it happened. Union Pacific had a problem, and that was they couldn't get into Chicago. Great Northern had the same problem. They couldn't get into Chicago. So the two fought over the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railway, which was in Chicago. James J. Hill was the winner of the fight and ended up with the CB&Q and had a huge advantage over the Union Pacific because he could get his trains and his cargoes into Chicago with a lot more ease than the UP could. So there was a truce settled between the two titans, and they kind of agreed not to dump ash on each other's tracks or something to that effect. Well, the truce was really just a breather. And during that time, secretly, without Hill knowing, Harriman was buying up the stock of another bankrupt railroad. It just so happened to be one that James J. Hill owned. He was the largest investor in the Northern Pacific Railway, which, by the way, is celebrating its 150th anniversary this year, having started just outside of Duluth. Harriman starts amassing this huge amount of stock secretly. The word gets to Hill that this is happening. Somebody's trying to control the market on the NP. Where is Hill at the time? He's out in Seattle on business. Where does he need to be? On Wall Street. He orders all other trains on the tracks of the Great Northern to take to the hole, or as we say, go into a siding. That way his express train could highball it straight from the West Coast all the way to St. Paul and then eventually to New York City. The reason Harriman was interested in the NP in the first place was that Hill had parked 49% of the CB&Q stock in the NP, 51% in the Great Northern. He owned both of the railroads. He thought he had control. But Harriman figured if he owned the NP, he would own 49% of the CB&Q and would have a better shot of getting into Chicago. Meanwhile, Hill is racing towards St. Paul. He takes his train on the main line at record speeds. He covers the distance, 1,800 miles, from Seattle to St. Paul in a record 45 hours and 50 minutes, shaving 21 hours off the normal time. He had to get to New York City. And when he did, that's where the two titans clashed. It was mano a mano on Wall Street. Now, they couldn't do it alone. Hill was heavily in debt, and really so was Harriman. They needed some outside help. Hill went to his old buddy, J.P. Morgan. Harriman goes to Rockefeller. That's where he's getting his money. So it wasn't just Hill versus Harriman, it was Hill and J.P. Morgan versus Harriman and Rockefeller. Meanwhile, J.P. Morgan and Rockefeller are trying to put together the deal in 1901 to form U.S. Steel. This was a major catastrophe on Wall Street and led to one of the biggest crashes of all time. But not before in May of 1901, NP stock went through the roof. At one time, you could buy NP stock for 25 cents. Normally, it was about $100. On May 9th, it hit $1,000 a share because of the speculation in the two fighting for control of the Northern Pacific Railway. At the end, J.P. Morgan, always the deal maker, manages to solve the problem. Everybody goes into what's known as the Great Northern Holdings, and they put all the railroads together. But guess who put an end to that? The Sherman Antitrust Act. And then there was this long peace until finally in 1955, they were able to put those railroads together in what was the beginning of the Great Northern, Northern Pacific, CB&Q, SP&S, and today's Burlington Northern Santa Fe. But it was on this date that they started the fight that started the incredible war between Harriman and Hill. And quite honestly, Hill won both rounds. Harriman went on to own railroads and be very successful in his own right, and the two never really quarreled again in their lives. They'd have enough fighting for a while, I think. Well, that's today in history, 118 years ago today. What are you doing today? Well, you should do what your mama told you. Wash your hands, cover your coughs, don't touch your face, keep a social distance. And I'm sure she said this too. Let's take care of each other.